Welcome to another deep dive. We're really thrilled you're joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to have you here.
Every now and then we get a stack of reading material that goes way beyond simply telling a story. It drops us into a completely different era.
A completely different mindset, really.
Right. It forces you to look at the pop culture you consume every single day through a totally different lens. So today, our mission is to unpack the origins of hip hop.
Which is a huge topic.
Oh, massive. We are tracing its trajectory from a sweltering rec room in the South Bronx
Yeah.
to this global multi-billion-dollar cultural force.
But it's not just a history lesson. We're also going to explore the incredibly complex, legally fraught, and honestly kind of philosophically messy world of modern music sampling.
And ownership. Who actually owns a sound?
Exactly. And to make sense of all of this, we're pulling from a really diverse stack of materials today.
Yeah, let's go over the sources real quick.
Sure. We have a deeply analytical academic thesis from Washington University, and that focuses on the theory of musical borrowing.
Which is fascinating. And we are cross-referencing that with some historical journalism from The Guardian.
Right, covering the socioeconomic collapse of 1970s New York, plus some sharp critical essays on the mythology of early hip-hop culture.
And, maybe the best part, first-hand interview transcripts with the pioneers who actually stood behind the turntables back in the day.
It's a great stack. If we connect this to the bigger picture right away, we have to understand that hip-hop wasn't just a new musical genre.
No, not at all.
It was an entirely new way of interacting with recorded sound. It acted as a literal cultural life raft for a completely neglected generation.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to imagine 1970s New York, specifically the South Bronx.
It was grim.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
We're looking at a landscape where landlords were literally torching their own tenements.
Just for the insurance payouts.
Exactly. Because the property values had absolutely cratered. The city was practically bankrupt, and basic services were just slashed.
Plus, you had the construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway, which had essentially gutted the entire borough.
Sliced right through it. So that is the crucible this music was forged in. It wasn't born in a studio. It was an organic survival mechanism.
Right, you have this entire generation of youth surrounded by urban decay, dealing with a municipality that had, frankly, abandoned them.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Yep. In that vacuum, gang culture initially took over. You had groups like the Black Spades, the Savage Skulls.
The Ghetto Brothers.
Right. They were controlling the turf, squatting in these burned-out buildings. But the defining shift happened when that really aggressive territorial energy started transforming.
Into a different kind of competition.
Exactly. Neighborhood block parties became the new battlegrounds. Grandmaster Flash actually talked about this exact environment in his interviews.
What did it say?
He described his neighborhood almost like a village. Everyone knew each other. And ironically, one of their biggest pastimes was flying kites on the rooftops.
Wow.
Yeah, right next to the rubble of these burned-down buildings.
That image alone, flying kites over burning buildings, it tells you so much about the resilience of that era.
It really does.
And you can't talk about the socioeconomic reality of 1970s New York without talking about the blackout of 1977.
Oh, a massive turning point.
When the lights went out across the entire city, it wasn't just a night of chaos. I mean, it was chaotic, but it was also this bizarre, accidental democratization of audio technology.
The blackout is a crucial flashpoint in the documents. During the resulting looting, all this high-end audio equipment, massive amplifiers, twin turntables, top-tier speakers.
That stuff these kids could never afford.
And never. It suddenly ended up in the hands of the neighborhood youth. Flash recounts this incredible moment from that night.
Let's hear it.
Some local looters literally presented him with a pristine, top-of-the-line stereo system. He asked them where they got it, and they just brushed him off.
Like, don't ask questions.
Exactly. They said, none of your business. Now when you come out into the street, you're going to sound good.
That is wild. That single night basically armed a neighborhood with the tools they needed to broadcast their culture.
And you have to contrast what was happening in the streets of the Bronx with what was happening down in Midtown Manhattan at the exact same time.
Right. Midtown had disco.
Studio 54.
The whole Saturday Night Fever aesthetic. Celebrity launch parties. Disco was this massive global phenomenon, but it was incredibly exclusive.
Highly exclusive.
You needed money, you needed the right clothes, hard-soled shoes, and you had to somehow get past the velvet rope.
The veteran critic Nelson George points out in our reading that there was a profound schism between kid culture and adult culture right then.
Hip-hop was the definitive kid culture response.
Exactly. A response to the elitism of disto. Hip-hop was born in the parks, the rec centers, the schoolyards.
It was for the kids in sneakers who were never, ever going to get into a Midtown club.
It was raw, it wasn't respectable by mainstream standards, and most importantly, it was a pure meritocracy.
You couldn't buy your way in.
Nope. You earned your respect through your skills.
Which brings us to the first of the 4 foundational elements of this culture, the DJ.
The architect of the sound.
Right, and that starts with DJ Kool Herc.
August 11, 1973.
We are at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the West Bronx. Herc is an 18-year-old kid throwing a back-to-school party in the rec room for his sister.
And he brings down his sound system, which he calls the Herculoids.
The Herculoids, this massive, crushingly loud rig inspired by the sound system culture of his native Jamaica.
And what Herc did that night, it fundamentally changed how humans interact with recorded music.
He was playing funk and soul records, right?
Yeah, but he was highly attuned to the psychology of the dancers in the room. He noticed that the crowd only really went wild during the instrumental breakdowns.
The break.
Right. That brief, maybe 10-second window in a song where the vocals drop out, the melody strips away, and it's just the raw, heavy percussion holding the groove.
The dancers would wait all night just for those few seconds.
So he invents a technique to capitalize on that. He calls it the merry-go-round.
And this is genius. Instead of letting the record play through, he buys 2 identical copies of the same record.
Say James Brown's Give It Up or Turn It Loose, or the incredible bongo band's Apache.
He puts them on 2 separate turntables, and when the drum break finishes on the first record,
He immediately drops the needle on the exact same break on the second record,
he just keeps bouncing back and forth.
extending a fleeting 10-second drum solo into 10, 15, even 20 minutes of uninterrupted rhythm.
If we look at the musical theory behind this from the WashU thesis, it's a profound mutation.
It really is. Traditionally, a break was designed by a composer as a momentary release of tension.
Right, a quick transition before returning to the main chorus.
But Herc hijacked that moment. He isolated it and stretched it into infinity. He completely abandoned the traditional structure of the pop song.
He didn't care about the hit singles at all. He was digging through bargain bins for obscure B-sides just to find 3 seconds of a perfect drum groove.
And by creating that infinite loop, Herc inadvertently birthed the next 2 elements of the culture.
Breaking and the MC.
Because the rhythm was now so aggressive and extended, the dancers had the space to completely evolve their movements.
Herc actually started calling the dancers who went the hardest during these sections the Bow Boys and Bow Girls.
Break boys and break girls. The physical response to the music completely shifted here.
It moved from standing choreography, the top rock, down to the floor.
It became highly acrobatic. Elaborate footwork, gravity-defying freezes, the iconic head spins.
It was the literal physical manifestation of the drum break.
And it was intensely competitive, which is key. It provided a creative, non-lethal outlet for all that residual gang energy we talked about earlier.
Battles were fought on cardboard instead of street corners.
Exactly.
We know breaking eventually went global. It caught the world's attention when the Rocksteady crew appeared in the 1983 film Flashdance.
Just a brief appearance, but it blew minds.
But back in those early Bronx Park jams, while the dancers are tearing up the concrete, the DJ realizes he's created a new problem for himself.
Right. By hyper-focusing on the turntables and ensuring the beats match up perfectly, he can no longer engage with the crowd.
He is stuck behind the decks.
So he needs a proxy. He needs a voice to maintain the energy while he handles the mechanics.
And that introduces the third element, the MC, the master of ceremonies.
Grandmaster Flash had a great story about this exact dynamic.
Oh yeah, he was playing a party, executing these incredible, technically demanding turntable routines.
But the crowd was just staring at him.
They were losing interest because there was no vocal connection. He realized he needed someone on the microphone simply to hype the crowd up so he could focus on the vinyl.
In the beginning, the role was strictly utilitarian.
Early MCs, like Coke LaRock, who worked with Kool Herc, or Cowboy, who worked with Flash, they were just hype men.
They used simple call and response chant, yes, yes, y'all, that kind of thing. Just keeping the energy peaking and directing attention back to the DJ.
But human beings are natural communicators. Those simple chants quickly evolved into complex rhyme schemes.
And those rhymes turned into elaborate storytelling.
That WashU thesis draws a fascinating parallel here.
Right.
It suggests these early MCs essentially took on the role of modern-day griots.
Griots. In West African tradition, a griot is a wandering historian, a storyteller, a messenger who travels between villages, passing down the oral history of the people.
The Bronx MCs were serving that exact function. They were spreading local news, introducing new street slang, and documenting the daily struggles of their neighborhoods from park to park.
And the great irony of hip-hop is that as the MCs became more proficient at being griots, they ended up stealing the show.
By the time rap music became a commercialized, recorded product in the late 70s and early 80s, the DJ was pushed to the background.
The person who literally invented the art form.
Right, while the rapper became the star.
It's the classic trajectory of an invention outgrowing its creator.
But before we get into that commercial recording era, we should briefly touch on the fourth foundational element,
Graffiti.
the visual wing of the culture. It's fascinating because graffiti was, and largely still is, criminalized as vandalism.
But the materials we're reviewing emphasize the sheer aesthetic innovation taking place. Teenagers were inventing entirely new typographies and complex color theories on the sides of moving subway cars.
And philosophically, it served a similar purpose to the music. I mean, why risk arrest to spray paint a train?
The sociological consensus is that for a population society had actively marginalized, it was a profound assertion of existence.
The famous Bronx tagger, Takiai 183, noted that while he was just an ordinary kid on the street, his tags made him a citywide legend.
It was a massive, undeniable way of saying, I am here, I matter, you cannot ignore me.
Okay, so we had the DJ, the b-boy, the MC, and the graffiti writer. Now let's zoom back in on the DJ.
Because this is where the sheer technical genius of the era comes into focus.
Here's where it gets really interesting for the music nerds. Let's talk about Joseph Sadler, better known as Grandmaster Flash.
If Kool Herc discovered the break, Grandmaster Flash was the audio engineer who perfected it.
That distinction is crucial. Herc had the massive sound and the impeccable taste in records, but his actual transitions could be pretty chaotic.
Dropping a needle on a spinning record and hoping you hit the exact right groove is imprecise. It's a guessing game.
Flash looked at the turntable differently. He didn't see it as a playback device. He saw it as an instrument that could be mastered through applied physics.
He literally developed a mathematical formula for DJing.
He called it the quick mix theory. He even projected this equation onto a screen during a recent guest lecture at Columbia University.
The equation is 4BF equals 6CCR equals full loop extraction.
Let's actually unpack that math because it is brilliant. 4 bars forward equals 6 counterclockwise revolutions.
Flash calculated the physical circumference of a 12-inch vinyl record and mapped it against the standard 4x signature of funk music.
He realized that a 4-bar musical phrase mathematically equated to exactly 6 full backwards rotations of the vinyl.
Think about the absolute obsession required to figure that out. We're talking about a teenager sequestered in his bedroom, treating it like an acoustic laboratory.
He spent years hoarding broken equipment from junkyards. He blew out speakers, snapped needles, and destroyed amplifiers, just trying to force the technology to do something it wasn't designed to do.
Because turntables were built for forward motion. Dragging a heavy vinyl record backward against the stylus created immense friction.
It sounded terrible, and it destroyed the gear.
So Flash had to innovate the hardware itself. He went into his mother's sewing kit, took some felt, grabbed some wax paper from the kitchen, and layered them beneath the record.
By doing that, he eliminated the friction between the vinyl and the heavy metal platter of the turntable.
He essentially invented the modern slip-at. It allowed the record to glide freely under his fingertips.
Unbelievable DIY engineering, but he still had a massive blind spot. How do you find the exact start of the drum break on the record if you can't hear it before pushing it through the main speakers?
Right. Modern DJ mixers have a cue button and a crossfader, but that didn't exist then.
So Flash built his own peekaboo system.
He went to a local Radio Shack, bought a single-pole double-throw switch, and literally superglued it to his rudimentary Sony MX-8 microphone mixer.
And he wired an external earpiece into it.
This allowed him to toggle the audio feed. Click left, he hears the left turntable in his ear. Click right, he hears the right.
He was arguably the first DJ on the planet who could privately preview a record and line up the beat before feeding it to the crowd.
And to execute the transitions flawlessly in the dark, he developed what he called the clock theory.
He took a crayon and drew a physical line radiating out from the center label of the record, marking the exact groove where the drum break started.
He treated the vinyl like a clock face. If that wax mark was sitting at 9 o'clock, he could blindly spin the record backwards 6 times, stop it at 9 o'clock, and know with absolute certainty that the beat was perfectly cued.
All of this obsessive methodology culminated in his 1981 release, The Adventures of Grandmaster Flash on the Wheels of Steel.
It is a 7-minute masterclass in live turntablism.
Using 3 turntables simultaneously, he surgically cuts between tracks from Queen, Blondie, Chic, and the Incredible Bongo Band.
It remains one of the first commercially released recordings that captures hip-hop exactly as it sounded in the parks, a purely DJ-driven art form.
It unequivocally proved the turntable was a dynamic musical instrument. Now, as hip-hop began to expand beyond the borders of the Bronx, the technology evolved, and the narrative becomes much more complicated.
Very complicated.
As we look at the next major figure, Afrika Bambaataa, we have to navigate carefully here. The materials we're looking at today present very conflicting, heavily debated, and politically charged perspectives regarding his legacy.
Right, and to be clear to our listeners, we are simply mapping out the factual claims and historical narratives exactly as they are presented in these documents.
Exactly. We are not taking sides, we are not passing judgment or endorsing any specific viewpoint. We are just reporting the history on the page.
It is a deeply complex legacy. For decades, the mainstream historical narrative positioned Afrika Bambaataa as the godfather of the culture.
He was a former gang leader who purportedly experienced a profound awakening and decided to use the 4 elements of hip-hop to unify the warring factions of the Bronx.
He founded an organization known as the Universal Zulu Nation, which was built on a philosophy of peace, unity, and knowledge, wisdom, understanding.
Musically, his most defining contribution in these documents is the 1982 track Planet Rock, created with producer Arthur Baker.
This song represents a massive paradigm shift. They essentially abandoned physical funk records and turntables, opting instead to build a beat entirely from electronic machines.
It was an incredibly expensive gamble. They utilized an early Fairlight synthesizer, which was a piece of technology that cost over $100,000 at the time.
But they still needed a rhythm track. The producer, Arthur Baker, found a classified ad in the Village Voice offering a man with drum machine $30 a session.
That machine turned out to be the Roland TR-808, a piece of gear that would go on to define the sound of electronic music for the next 40 years.
Which raises an interesting point. If they had access to a $100,000 synth, why are they renting a drum machine from the classifieds?
It really speaks to the scrappy, hybrid nature of the production. They specifically wanted to emulate the cold, robotic aesthetic of the German electronic group Kraftwerk.
They interpolated the melody from Kraftwerk's Trans-Europe Express and recreated the frantic rhythm of their track numbers.
But merging Bronx street culture with European avant-garde synthpop wasn't seamless. The MCs in Bambaataa's group, the Soulsonic Force, actually struggled with the beat initially.
It was incredibly fast and erratic compared to the warm, swinging funk breaks they were accustomed to. They had to adapt their entire flow.
One of the MCs, GLOBE, had to invent a syncopated, rapid-fire vocal delivery he dubbed MC Popping, just to keep up with the relentless pace of that 808 drum machine.
Planet Rock was a monumental success. It basically birthed the entire subgenre of electro and proved that hip-hop didn't have to rely on vinyl records.
However, the documents we're reviewing also present a fierce critical counter-narrative. There's a highly critical essay from Metropolis newspaper by Sharif Salakhan that aggressively dismantles Bambaataa's standing in the culture.
The author argues that Bambaataa's legacy has been artificially inflated. The Metropolis piece claims that labeling Bambaataa the father of hip-hop is historically inaccurate.
The core argument is that Bambaataa is the father of electro, not hip-hop.
The essay points out that Herc and Flash are the true architects. Herc isolated the break, Flash engineered the mix, and another DJ, Grand Wizard Theodore, invented the scratch.
The author contends that Bambaataa simply adopted the aesthetics of the culture because of his proximity in the Bronx, but his actual musical output was a distinct hybrid of Kraftwerk, disco, and funk.
Furthermore, the essay heavily critiques the Universal Zulu Nation itself.
The author claims it wasn't an entirely original hip-hop movement, but rather an organization that co-opted the conduct codes and homemade tenets of the 5% Nation, the Nation of Islam, and the Black Panther Party.
Functioning more as a personality cult centered around Bambaataa.
And the historical record documents a very dark turn in this narrative. In May of 2016, Afrika Bambaataa stepped down as the head of the Zulu Nation.
This resignation followed severe public allegations of child sex trafficking and sexual abuse, initially brought forward by a man named Ronald Savage.
with several others subsequently coming forward with similar claims.
The fallout within the community was devastating. The reading notes that the scandal shattered the foundational trust in the Zulu Nation's leadership.
By 2017, hundreds of high-ranking members resigned in protest and splintered off to form a new, separate organization called the Zulu Union, effectively fracturing the very community Bambaataa had originally built.
It is a sobering reminder that the architects of this culture were deeply flawed human beings, not the infallible superheroes they are often mythologized to be.
But returning to the evolution of the sound, the mechanical innovations of planet rock paved the way for the next major technological leap.
It signaled the move from live turntables to digital samplers, ushering in what the WashU thesis calls the golden age of sampling, spanning roughly from 1986 to 1992.
This era is characterized by an explosion of creative freedom. With the advent of machines like the EMU SP1200 and the Akai MPC, producers were no longer bound by the physical limitations of spinning two records.
A sampler allowed them to record tiny isolated fragments of audio, a horn blast, a snare hit, a vocal wail, digitally store them, manipulate their pitch, and stack them into incredibly dense, polyrhythmic sonic collages.
But the moment producers started building entire albums out of other people's recorded sounds, a massive wave of pushback hit.
A lot of critics viewed sampling as inherently unoriginal. The WashU thesis quotes Nicholas Payton, a Grammy-winning jazz trumpet player who is vehemently opposed to the practice.
He calls it outright stealing. He refers to producers as lazy, indulging in sloppy seconds, and argues that if you actually take the time to learn an instrument, you don't need to steal someone else's performance with a sampler.
It is a very common purist critique, but the academic analysis pushes back against it brilliantly.
The thesis argues that sampling is not uniquely unoriginal. It actually mirrors the long-standing traditions of musical borrowing found in highly respected genres.
For instance, in classical music, composers have been lifting and reworking themes for centuries. Take the Dies Irae, a medieval Gregorian chant associated with the Day of Wrath and funerals.
Hundreds of classical composers, from Mozart to Berlioz, have directly quoted that specific melody in their own symphonies to instantly evoke a sense of death or the supernatural.
Which completely flips the narrative that sampling is lazy. If anything, it requires a deeper knowledge of music history than just playing a guitar.
The thesis also brings up the concept of intermusicality in jazz. Jazz musicians will frequently quote melodies from other songs during a live improvisation.
They do it to pay homage to a mentor, or to invoke a specific mood, or even as an inside joke for the educated listeners in the room.
Exactly. The argument is that a hip-hop producer flipping a sample is doing the exact same thing as a jazz saxophonist quoting Charlie Parker.
When a producer samples a James Brown drum break, they aren't just stealing a rhythm because they can't play the drums.
They are making a deliberate, artistic choice to reach into the past, pull that specific historical and cultural weight into the present, and introduce the legacy of Black music to a new generation.
The sampler isn't a Xerox machine. It's a tool for archival research. It is a form of cultural archaeology.
Unfortunately, the American legal system did not view it as cultural archaeology. They viewed it as strict copyright infringement. He released a track called Alone Again, which prominently sampled the piano intro and 3 specific words from Gilbert O'Sullivan's 1972 soft rock hit, Alone Again, naturally.
And the crucial detail here is that Biz Markie did not have the sample cleared.
His legal team actually reached out for permission. But according to industry lore, because Biz purposefully sang the chorus off-key for comedic effect, O'Sullivan's representatives were insulted and refused.
Biz decided to release the record anyway.
That decision changed the music industry forever. Judge Kevin Thomas Duffy presided over the case, and he came down with a blistering ruling.
He found Biz Markie guilty of copyright infringement, levied a $250,000 fine, and issued an injunction barring Warner Brothers from selling the album,
forcing them to physically pull the records from store shelves.
The judge was so incensed by the practice of sampling that he actually referred the matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution, equating sampling to literal theft.
Biz Markie, true to his comedic nature, responded to the lawsuit by naming his very next album, All Samples Cleared, and posing on the cover dressed in a judge's robe and powdered wig.
We can laugh at the audacity of that now, but at the time, the chilling effect on the industry was absolute.
It highlighted a fundamental clash of ideologies. The thesis explores how, within African American oral traditions and early hip-hop culture, musical ideas and lyrical phrases were often viewed as communal wealth.
They were elements of a shared culture meant to be passed around, iterated upon, and reinterpreted.
But Western copyright law is built on a foundation of strict individual private property.
And once that legal precedent was set, the very aesthetic of hip-hop was forced to change. You could no longer afford to layer 20 different microsamples from 20 different artists into a single beat like Public Enemy used to do.
It would cost millions in clearance fees. Producers had to strip their beats down to one or two legally cleared loops, or they had to hire studio musicians to replay the melodies or synthesize the sounds entirely from scratch.
Which brings us to the harsh economic realities of ownership. When the system works, artists get their due.
Look at MC Hammer sampling Rick James's Super Freak for You Can't Touch This. Hammer recognized the undeniable value of the bass line he was borrowing, ensured Rick James was credited as a co-writer, and James earned massive royalties from it.
But then you look at someone like George Clinton, the mastermind behind Parliament Funkadelic. His heavy synthesized funk was the absolute undeniable blueprint for West Coast hip-hop in the late 80s and 90s.
Dr. Dre's entire G-Funk sound is built on the DNA of George Clinton. He's one of the most sampled artists in the history of recorded music.
But because so many of those early samples were taken during the Wild West era before the Bismarcky ruling or were entangled in predatory publishing contracts, legal experts estimate George Clinton missed out on anywhere from $10 to $20 million in revenue.
Had the communal oral tradition aligned with legal compensation, he would be one of the wealthiest men in the industry.
So we've tracked this from the lawless innovation of the Bronx to the strict confines of the courtroom. If we fast forward to the modern era, we can see how the ethics, the art, and the legality of sampling continue to collide.
Let's look at Kanye West. Regardless of his public persona, his architectural impact on the modern art of sampling is deeply analyzed in these texts.
Right. Early in his career, Kanye popularized a style known as chipmunk soul.
He would take obscure 1970s soul records, pitch the audio up significantly so the vocalist sounded incredibly high and fast like a chipmunk, and build boom-bap drum beats underneath them.
But by his 2005 album, Late Registration, he was trying to elevate that technique into something much more grandiose.
He brought in John Brion, a composer known for Hollywood film scores, to co-produce the album. And the pinnacle of this cinematic sampling approach is the track Diamonds from Sierra Leone.
For this track, Kanye samples the legendary Shirley Bassey singing the theme to the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever.
But it's not a simple copy and paste job. The musical analysis of this track is fascinating. He keeps the majestic, sweeping texture of the original orchestral intro and Bassey's powerful vocal, but he actively manipulates the pitch and the tempo to create this swelling, anxious tension.
He loops her singing the phrase "Diamonds Are Forever," layering it over a heavy, driving bass kick, a crisp hi-hat groove, and a prominent harpsichord melody.
But the true brilliance lies in how he deploys the socio-political context of the sample.
He takes a glamorous, opulent song associated with James Bond and luxury jewelry, and he uses it as the sonic backdrop to rap about the horrific, bloody realities of the conflict diamond trade in Sierra Leone.
He takes the historical baggage of the Shirley Bassey song and weaponizes it for a modern political critique.
This perfectly illustrates the academic argument that sampling is a dialogue between eras. Kanye didn't just borrow the audio wave, he borrowed the meaning of the original song and subverted it to amplify his own message.
It's a highly sophisticated form of musical commentary. Now, I want to trace the unbelievable journey of a completely different melody to show how sampling can actually forge entirely new cultural traditions.
This is the lineage of a track called Bodisha.
Originally released in 1987 by the Irish New Age folk singer Enya. It's not a pop song, it's just this haunting, ethereal, atmospheric humming.
The life cycle of this single melody is remarkable. In 1996, the hip-hop group The Fugees sampled Bodisha as the foundation for their massive hit, Ready or Not.
But falling into the same trap as Bismarcky, they didn't clear the sample beforehand.
Enya's team noticed immediately, and she was prepared to sue them for copyright infringement.
But in a rare turn of events, rather than just dragging them to court, she actually listened to the Fugees' track.
She realized that Ready or Not carried a strong, positive, anti-violence message that didn't violate the spiritual intent of her original recording.
So she agreed to settle out of court. The Fugees paid a reported $3 million fee and literally placed stickers on the physical CDs, giving her proper credit.
And that could have been the end of the story. But in 2004, the R&B singer Mario Winans and producer P. Diddy decided they wanted to use the exact same Enya sample for their track. I don't want to know.
Having learned the harsh legal lessons of the 90s, Diddy went directly to Enya's team before ever releasing the song.
He negotiated a deal that gave her 60% of the publishing royalties and official co-billing on the track.
And the lineage keeps going. In 2019, the artist Rodemi sampled it for an Afrobeats track called In My Bed.
And then in 2022, the producer Metro Boomin, alongside The Weeknd and 21 Savage, sampled the Mario Winans version of the song for their absolute monster hit, Creepin'.
What the analysts point out here is how this completely subverts the usual discourse around cultural appropriation.
Typically, the conversation centers on white artists appropriating the work of black musicians without credit.
But in this instance, you have a continuous multi-generational line of black artists spanning 90s boom bap, 2000s R&B, modern Afrobeats, and trap music, repeatedly sampling a white, Irish, New Age singer.
The cultural critics argue that they essentially inducted Enya into an established black musical tradition.
They created a massive, cross-genre, share-alike family tree. They didn't just steal a melody, they actively passed it down from generation to generation, continually reinterpreting it for a new era.
It's a beautiful example of how sampling, when properly credited and respected, can transcend geographic and cultural boundaries.
But, as we know, the definition of proper respect isn't always agreed upon, which brings us to our final, and perhaps most contentious, modern case study.
The controversy between Beyoncé and Keyless.
In 2022, Beyoncé released her critically acclaimed album Renaissance. On the track Energy, the producers included a very brief 3-second vocal riff, the la 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 la, from Keyless's iconic 2003 hit, Milkshake.
Now, it's vital to define the terminology here. This was not a direct sample of the original audio recording. It was an interpolation.
That means Beyoncé's team didn't copy and paste the old audio file. They resung the melody from scratch in the studio.
Because of this legal distinction, Beyoncé only had to clear the publishing rights with the credited songwriters, not the performer.
The credited songwriters for Milkshake are the production duo, the Neptunes, Pharrell Williams, and Chad Hugo.
Beyoncé's team cleared the interpolation with them, paid the fees, and legally, everything was perfectly by the book.
But morally, it ignited a massive firestorm. Keyless found out about the interpolation at the exact same moment the general public did, and she was absolutely furious.
She took to social media, bypassing the legal arguments entirely, and called it an act of profound disrespect and outright theft.
To understand Keyless's outrage, you have to look at the historical baggage attached to that song. Keyless has been incredibly vocal for years about her early recording contracts with the Neptunes.
She alleges that she was promised an even split of the profits, but was manipulated by management and lawyers into signing predatory contracts that left her with 0 songwriting credits and virtually no publishing revenue from her first 2 albums,
including the massive global success of Milkshake.
So, from Keyless's perspective, when Beyoncé legally paid Pharrell to use that melody, it was rubbing salt in a decades-old wound.
Even though it was just a tiny 3-second snippet, Keyless argued that Milkshake was her creative identity. It was her voice, her persona.
And for one massive artist to not even grant a courtesy phone call to another artist before using her defining hit felt like a massive violation of the unwritten ethical code of the music industry.
It divided the internet instantly. You had factions arguing that Keyless should just be grateful for the exposure on a Beyoncé album,
while others forcefully pointed out that legal ownership on a piece of paper does not equate to moral ownership of a piece of art.
The backlash was so intense that Beyoncé ultimately went back into the master files and quietly removed the Milkshake interpolation from the song entirely on all streaming platforms.
It is the ultimate distillation of everything we've talked about today. It proves that even a 3-second vocal run carries decades of emotional, financial, and cultural baggage.
When a producer decides to sample or interpolate a piece of music, they aren't just borrowing a mathematical sequence of notes.
They are borrowing the lived experience of the artist who originally performed it, the economic struggles they endured, and the cultural context of the era in which it was born.
It really forces you to reevaluate how you listen to music.
Yeah.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started in the ashes of the 1970s South Bronx, where a teenager named Kool Herc figured out how to isolate a drum break and accidentally created a cultural life raft for an entire generation.
We watched Grandmaster Flash apply the scientific method to the turntable, turning a playback device into an instrument of infinite possibilities.
We navigated the complicated, messy evolution from the community-driven block parties of the Zulu Nation to the digital, synthesized future of electro.
And we tracked how the communal oral traditions of sampling collided violently with the strict private property laws of the American courtroom.
It is a testament to human ingenuity. This culture took the discarded remnants of a crumbling city, salvaged the vinyl records that mainstream society had thrown in the bargain bins, and engineered them into the most dominant, influential cultural force on the planet.
The next time you turn on a playlist and you hear a familiar horn blast, or a pitched-up soul vocal, or a heavy funk drum break buried underneath a brand new pop song, I want you to remember that you aren't just hearing a catchy beat.
You are listening to an active archaeological dig. You are hearing a conversation taking place across decades, a dialogue between generations of artists who are keeping their history alive through sound.
And that leaves us with a fascinating and somewhat unsettling thought for you to mull over. We've spent this entire time dissecting sampling as a profoundly human way to time travel, a way for today's musicians to converse with the artists of the past.
But we are currently standing on the precipice of an era defined by AI-generated music and flawless voice cloning technology.
Think about the implications. When a machine learning algorithm can instantly generate a mathematically perfect funk break, or flawlessly synthesize the voice of a Shirley Bassey or an Enya without ever having to sample a physical record or negotiate with a human artist, how does that fundamentally alter the landscape we just explored?
If there is no original human creator to clear a sample with, and no royalty check to write, what happens to the historical lineage?
What happens to the human struggle, the lived experience, and the culture that gave birth to that specific feeling in the first place? If we automate the creation of the sound, do we completely sever our connection to the culture?
That is a massive question and definitely something to think about the next time you hear an AI-generated track on your feed. It really highlights how precious the human element of this history is. Thank you so much for exploring this with us today. We will catch you on the next deep dive.